I would just then we'll open the floor for discussion. First, I would like to make a small question to Ambassador P S Raghavan. So, what does it mean for India? Because India is always seen as an ally of Russia. So, where do we stand in terms of business, trade, and also politically with respect to this dispute?
Well, India has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the post-Cold War opening up. We benefited from globalization. We benefited from the technology opening up. We also benefited in another unique way, which is what you're now mentioning. You see, we were a close strategic partner of the USSR and then later of Russia. But what the end of the Cold War enabled us to do was to reach out to America and to build a very strong strategic partnership with America. And in fact, again, you see, what was the strategic underpinning of our strategic partnership with America? It started in the 2000s. It was America even then recognizing China as one of the, not one of the rising global power that will challenge its dominance as a superpower. And right from then onwards, in fact, America even made public statements that time that we are committed to India becoming a strong military power. The idea was that India would be a counterpoise vis-a-vis China. So today, when you look at how India is dealing with Russia, Ukraine, and how India is dealing with America, it is important to understand this strategic underpinning that holds India and America together. And that is why America, we managed to also persuade America that what we are doing with Russia, Ukraine is in our interest, of course, but it is not contradictory to American interests. Why is it in our interest? I mean, look, again, our external affairs minister said this many times. We are looking to make sure that this crisis does not hurt our economy, does not halt our progress. We have an ambition, having grown this far, we have an ambition to become a developed country in the shortest possible time frame. We do not wish to get embroiled in a war which is not of our own making and which is in the European theater just for the sake of condemning Russia. So we get oil at low prices, we buy oil at low prices, we are buying fertilizer from them. And so we are actually dealing with this situation using our own strategic autonomy. At the same time, America recognizes our utility vis-a-vis China, and that is why we continue to promote our interaction in the Quad and with other cooperation mechanisms with the US, which actually work to diplomatically restrain China to the extent that they do. So this is basically what India's stand is in this Ukraine situation. We've managed to stick to it very resolutely. And what we have shown, in fact, by this, we have also shown how far the world has come from the Cold War, where how small and medium powers, we are a medium power, we're not a small power, but how a medium power can protect its interests in the face of enormous pressure from the big powers and from all three powers. I mean, we are under enormous pressure from China, from US and Russia. We've managed to hold our own and to get our way in what we want domestically.
Okay. Good. I have a question to Ambassador. Sir, like you said, since the Cold War, we have moved from unipolar, multipolar. So this is a new world order in the making. Let's say that. But having come from
it is not yet in the making. We hope that it is in the making.
Okay. So during the Cold War, I mean, standing for democracy was at least a smokescreen. But like you said, the US deciding to engage with any power, economically or militarily, any power on a rules-based order, so need not be a democracy. So is that also adding some, is that also lengthening the duration of the war? That is one. That is one question. And the second one is it, I mean, when compared to the USSR periods, is Ukraine would turn out as a Afghanistan 2.0 for Russia?
Yeah. There's this whole narrative of democracy versus autocracy, which is what the US has tried to actually US has tried to justify its position in the Russia-Ukraine war and to justify its opposition to Russia in this narrative. Now, the problem with this narrative is twofold. One is that, you see, this is a narrative that has come out of the Cold War. During the Cold War, it was wonderful. You were all fighting communism. And you are the non-communism. Whether you call it free world, democracy, whatever it is, you are non-communism and you are fighting against the expansion of communism. Also, you could sort of join your alliance together on the military threat of the Soviet Union. Now, at the end of the Cold War, both these dissipated. There is no longer an ideological opposition. There is no longer a military threat. So today, to say democracy versus autocracy is very hollow. And its hollowness is seen by the fact that so many democracies of the world have not actually joined the US in condemning Russia or in imposing sanctions. So, we can't use a Cold War narrative, extrapolate it into this situation is very different. It doesn't work. Because countries now have the freedom to pursue their own interests. They didn't have it during the Cold War, because they were all bound in this political-military alliance. Today, they have the freedom. They have the economic strength. They have political influence in the region. They have military strength. So you can no longer bind them with slogans which worked during the Cold War but are irrelevant today. Now, as far as Ukraine becoming an Afghanistan or a Vietnam for Russia, whichever way you look at it, see, unfortunately or fortunately, Ukraine is sitting in the middle of Europe. And therefore, the tolerance in Europe, in America, also for this war. See, in Vietnam, you could bomb the hell out of those people. Nobody bothered. Those are not even the days of TV. In Afghanistan, you were bombing the hell out of those people even when there was TV, but TV cameras never reached there. And you could control TV cameras. Today, this is going on in the full glare of everybody. It is coming into everybody's. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but the fact that Iraqis and Afghanistans were not white and blonde-haired and blue-eyed meant that their plea was ignored. Whereas today, every Ukrainian who runs away or every Ukrainian who dies becomes a big scene. So, because of these reasons, this war eventually has to end sooner rather than later. It can't carry on for 20 years because Europe cannot countenance a destruction of a country and an economy in its own, not even backyard. This is its front yard. Europe cannot, and because also Europe knows. Yesterday, Afghanistan was devastated. Nobody is going to come forward to rehabilitate it and reconstruct it. Nobody has come forward to reconstruct Iraq. You cannot leave Ukraine like that. So the amount of money that will be required to rehabilitate and reconstruct Ukraine is increasing by the billions every day. That also is something that will act towards putting an end to the war. On what terms, I don't know. But also you see countries like Germany and France and even the other countries in Europe are suffering the impact of the war in economic terms. So that will have eventually some impact. When and how is what we can't say.
When you're talking about the economic perspective, like you said, India has gained in an economic perspective. But a simple question here would be like, since you have worked extensively since those Cold War days, I mean, I used to read that during the Cold War, especially during the Glasnost and Perestroika, or the new Russia is emerging, during that period, the Indian Prime Minister, the then Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi had a considerable rapport between Reagan as well as Gorbachev. He was able to talk to them on a simultaneous level. So my question here would be, is India in such a position? Economically, like you say, we have got some benefits, but politically, are we in such an advantage right now?
Okay. Firstly, economically, I would not say that we've got advantage from this war. What I would say is that we have tried to protect ourselves to minimize the economic disadvantages from the war.
Okay.
I think that we should be, that is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, this Rajiv Gandhi, Gorbachev, Reagan, actually, one Hindu correspondent has written a book on this subject. In fact, which is partly on this subject, partly on other subjects. But he talks about this in great detail. See, eventually that didn't work either. Eventually, Rajiv Gandhi was deeply disappointed by Reagan's responses to him, and he felt that America had let him down. But in this case, even more so, you see, the mediation works when the two sides are not in touch with each other, and therefore you can sort of try to get the two sides to maximize advantages to them. Today, the situation is very odd. Do you mediate between Russia and Ukraine? Whereas the major interests are between Russia and the US. So, you try to mediate between Russia and the US. US says, hey, it's Ukraine who's fighting the war, not us. You talk to Russia, Russia says it is not Ukraine, it is the US which is fighting the war against us.
Okay.
And in any case, you already have, even in spite of all this propaganda, there are these lines of communication that the US and Russia have between each other. The CIA chief is in regular touch with his counterpart, with the national security chief in Russia. The chief of army staff, the chiefs of joint staff of the US is in touch with his counterpart. The best way of looking at it is, even while this war was going on, US and Russia managed to exchange prisoners in each other's countries in between. I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a flight which went to Istanbul and from here, and they actually exchanged prisoners whom they had taken long back in time, which clearly was an indication that they are talking to each other. So when people are talking to each other, outsiders like us can add no value by helping them to talk to each other.
Okay. That's a nice.
So anybody else has any question?
Ambassador.
Yeah.
So one thing. So you were talking about Europe will have to, try to find a solution to the conflict, or will have to bring the war to an end sooner rather than later. But do you think Europe has the autonomy to take that decision? Because you see, Nord Stream pipeline was bombed by somebody. Nobody knows. Nobody wants to know. And not even Germany is raising a voice of opposition, because 49% of the pipeline was owned by 4 European countries. So does Europe have that autonomy to take the decision?
Very good question. And the answer at the moment is no. But the thing is, actually, one of the extraordinary manifestations of this war is the manner in which the United States has managed to get the Europeans together to act in a way that is against their own fundamental national interests in many ways. But at the same time, see, one way you can say it's against their fundamental national economic interests. At the other extreme, it's also that Russia is seen as a threat by many European countries. The point is that, and this is something that has been wonderfully camouflaged during this war, actually different European countries view Russia in a different light. But they have managed to put together, to sort of submerge their differences. And this is, by the way, this is something that has been going on since the year 2003. The Iraq war showed us their differences. Then in 2008, when Bucharest NATO summit wanted to invite Ukraine, there also these differences are shown up. In 2014, you see, France and Germany negotiated the Minsk agreements, and Poland and the Baltic countries actively worked to sort of sabotage it. So there have been differing interests within Europe for a long time. The fact that they've managed to keep it submerged is fantastic. It's a remarkable achievement. This is one of America's major achievements in this war. But how long will it last? You look at it eventually, look at the economic turmoil in France, economic turmoil in Germany, economic turmoil in UK. At some point of time, they have to pull up the drawbridges and say that, look, we have to now look after ourselves. When it will happen, we don't know. But you see, these are all things which may eventually work towards ending the war. Of course, it also depends. You see, today the Leopard tanks and the Challenger tanks have entered Ukraine for the first time. What impact do they have? If Ukrainians have one major military impact anywhere along that 1,000 line border, it might move either side towards something. Similarly, Russia has one major victory, that might also move the needle a little bit. But you see also, if you see what America is saying, look at what Fareed Zakaria is saying. Fareed Zakaria used to be the standard bearer of attack Russia. And see what he's saying today. Suddenly he's finding that American foreign policy is inflexible. Where was he 1 year ago? And New York Times, Washington Post. So you see some swings. Nobody should over-exaggerate it. But somewhere down the line, and as I said, $1 trillion is what they today say is the bill for rehabilitating Ukraine. Where is this coming from? Even if they can think they can actually take away all of Russia's reserves in the West, which they can't do. That's already $300 billion. Their foreign exchange reserves. So, it has to end. I mean, it can't keep on going. Only we are not astrologers enough to say how it will end.
So, with respect to the global politics, on the one hand, it is an alliance between Europe and US vis-a-vis Russia. On the other hand, when we talk about this side of the world, China and India, China has got inherent problems with the US, and India is benefited out of the oil trade with Russia. So how this equation will work between Russia, China, India, and if India is always in the fence whether to go with Russia or with the US, and particularly it is moving towards the US in the recent past, but because of the benefits which India is getting out of this particular trade, will there be a global realignment in terms of economy and in terms of the currency, etc.? What is your take on it?
Actually, you have asked 5 questions in this. because there are various elements to this. See, but I'll start with one thing, saying that India is not sitting on the fence.
Okay.
Because that is one of the things that you said. And it is not only the oil that benefits India. See, I want to bring another equation as far as India is concerned into this picture, which is, you see, all geopolitics is firstly based on geography. That is another reason why we don't act on Russia, Ukraine, the same way as the West or Europe has done. Take a look at India's map. What do you have? If you look up north, you have the Chinese which are against us in Ladakh, which are the face off in Ladakh. Just look up further west of that, you have this entire Eurasian landmass. You have, huge Russia there, China here, and then you come down, you have Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan. This is the region which is just next to us. And this is the region where tomorrow, after the Americans have left Afghanistan, it could create a huge security problem for us. Being active there and protecting ourselves in that region is very important for us. What does that mean? That means actually that means that if Russia and China were to get together and form a hostile axis against India, we are in great trouble. So we need to also look at that. We can't just give up Russia. Besides the arms, the weaponry that we depend on Russia for, that is one aspect. And the oil that we're buying, that also is another aspect. But more the longer term issue is that you have to make sure that a Russia-China alliance does not become, Russia has sufficient interest in India to ensure that a Russia-China alliance does not make it act against India. This is a very important part of India's calculations in this. The other thing is about the defense. Let's look at the arms. I said that the strategic underpinning of why America first started the strategic partnership with India was China. In spite of the fact that we had conducted our nuclear tests in 1998, and America had actually imposed huge sanctions on India at that time. Some of those sanctions still remain, by the way. People don't realize some American sanctions against us are still there. There are a few of them. But in spite of that, they actually joined up with us. And they said that they are interested in a strong military India because that is what can face up to China. They know perfectly well that if you abandon Russia now, or if Russia abandons you now, our military supplies of very critical equipment will stop. So India will become more militarily vulnerable. Therefore, US strategic ambition itself requires India to be strong, which means they understand why we are doing what we are doing with Russia. Okay, so it's not just on the fence. It is basically being able to persuade both of them that we're not acting against your interests while acting in our interests. And that's why we've been able to maintain. PM keeps talking to Biden all the time. The rumor now is that very soon he'll be visiting the US on a bilateral visit. If the US and the West were so angry with us or felt that we were sitting on the fence, we would not have so many interactions with them at such a high level. You have a virtual procession of foreign leaders coming into India today and an equal procession outward. So all this shows that it's not just sitting on the fence. It is essentially looking after it. As far as China goes, there is a very important aspect here to what you're saying, what you said about China. The US partnership is very important for us vis-a-vis China, because we are not strong enough today to take on China on our own. And that's a well-known fact. We have so many interlinkages and so on. What are we trying to do? We are trying to actually build up our own national strength to reduce the asymmetry between India and China, so that then we can deal with China on equal terms. And until such time, while we are building up our strength, you have a whole partnership with countries like US, Japan, Australia, other countries in Southeast Asia, all of which applies continued diplomatic pressure on China to seek to restrain some of its more outlandish activities. So it's a dual strategy, which again the US understands very well, and the US is with us. After all, Quad is essentially a US-led body. So you are looking at actions which everybody understands the reasons for. The problem, of course, is that if we should not fall into the error of assuming that the US is as interested in protecting us against China as we are, because US interests vis-a-vis China are broader, and they're a superpower. There are many other issues. That Taiwan is of greater interest to them than, say, our confrontation in Ladakh. We have to recognize that there is an asymmetry of that. I think you asked another point about currency. That is a larger issue. People have become Saudi Arabia, and countries have started saying that we will accept yuan for that. And similarly, Russia is saying that, if you are cutting us out of dollar, you are yourself weakening the dollar. These are actually very nascent developments. The dollar still remains the global reserve currency, and to topple it from that pedestal, I think it is not practical to think of in the foreseeable time frame.
Yeah, especially Chinese would not want the Chinese currency to be more globalized and more. They don't want to open for audits.
Yes, there is actually a point here, because by becoming the debtor of the world, the US is actually also hurting its own economy, and the Chinese would not want to do that. But they can dilute the prominence of the dollar by petrodollars becoming petro yuan. But it is marginal. It's not really very good.
So, and my
Ravishankar Swaminathan, I think he's
Stanley.
Jaishankar, I think Ravishankar, do you want to ask any?
Good.
No. He has posted a question. Pulitzer-winning American journalist Seymour Hersh published on his Substack a political expose on the US confirmed bombing and subsequent destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. Why is it in favor of world governance, beginning with Germany, to not condemn the attack?
Self-preservation. Self-preservation. Germany knows. See, the point is, if you look at the countries which could benefit from a blowing up of Nord Stream, you can name a few countries, but the countries who benefit from it and also have the wherewithal to carry out the operation to actually implement it, I would say there are only two: US and UK. Ukraine may want it to do, but Ukraine did not have the military and technological wherewithal to do it. The Poland and the Baltic countries may also have wanted to do it. Poland was the first to actually. The Polish leader was the first one to say thank you, America, when Nord Stream 2 was blown up. And then he tweeted this, and then he retracted his tweet very quickly.
Do you see a pattern? Do you see a pattern, Ambassador? Gorbachev trying to bring in glasnost perestroika, trying to get out of Afghanistan, US, and there we had China, Deng Xiaoping. With that in history, on Ukraine-Russia war, Putin, US, and Xi Jinping. Do you see a pattern? Because that time Deng Xiaoping emerged stronger economically, Chinese economy started growing. So are we in the same place in history today?
The pattern is simply like this, that the dominant power is always looking to retard the rise of the rising power. And you go right back to the, is it Thucydides or the trap of Athens and Sparta. So, and then what happens is, the other aspect is this, which you see when two major adversaries are belting it out, that the aspiring power quietly builds its strength and then comes up at some point of time. And it's a given in geopolitics that when you are the dominant power, you then try to befriend the number 3 power or neutralize it so that you can take on the number 2 power. And then, of course, after you've taken it on, then you focus on the number 3 power. Now, actually, in today's, the pattern has got disrupted today. The pattern has got disrupted today because the Americans patently recognize China as the bigger threat and Russia as the lesser threat. And if you look at June 2021, when Biden actually reached out to Putin, and they had a very good conversation, and Biden came back and said that, Putin is afraid of China and we can help him distance himself from China. So until that time, that pattern was being followed, where again the US felt that you neutralize Russia and take on China because that is but something happened in November, December, January, February as a result. And that is, again, it's a post-Cold War phenomenon. The number of other powers which had the ability to influence matters, they got into the act, and eventually they led to this situation where now you are actually running against the current, against the geopolitical logic. The geopolitical logic is that that America should be looking at China. Instead, America is looking at Russia and giving China the space to further strengthen itself, to further widen it. You see, it is this war that has given Xi Jinping the ability to go and broker this peace between Saudi and Iran.
Correct.
If this war had not been there, that question would not have arisen, because greater American attention would be on West Asia.
Exactly.
So now you are going against geopolitical current.
So next one is Dr. Professor Jnani Ganesan from University of Toronto. You would like to ask a question?
Thank you, Pugal. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to our friends in India. So basically, sir, I have 2 questions. So in the last answer, you have basically already preempted me and you have answered that, but I will say that again anyway. So since I am a Canadian, I see 2 things here. As you observed correctly, there's a war fatigue has started to seep into the Western countries. So the economy is in doldrums in Canada and in all the West. So our interest rates are very high. The markets are falling. So the economic impact is now biting the people. So there's a fatigue, war fatigue has seeped in, even though the country is pro-Ukrainian, the Canadians, as well as in the US, Americans, or the Western countries, the people are taking a back step from supporting the war anymore. That is one observation. Second observation, China has used this opportunity very well than any country in the world by bringing in the whole of Middle East under his arm or on his palm, so that when this war ends in some form or manner, the current world order, the Western world order, is going to be affected severely. So the major winning person is going to be China, since they have got the Middle East and the Africans on their palm, and America and its allies, especially India, is going to have to work overtime to untangle this issue. I would like to have your comment on this, please, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. 2 points that you made. One is about the economic difficulties diluting the support for the war. It's very evident. I think you see a very peculiar trend. I don't know, but didn't quite follow what happened in Canada, but I know what happened in the US and what happened in Europe. You know, in the beginning stages when gas prices were at the pump were increasing very rapidly, these European leaders and the American leaders are coming out and saying this is Putin's war. It is Putin that has increased the gas prices and it's all caused. Actually, that was rubbish. It was caused because of a situation which was already going on. But they were happy to say that Putin has caused this war in order to drum up support for the war. But you notice what has happened over the last 1 year. They are not 1 year, the last 4 or 5 months. They are not at all talking about the economic woes being caused by the war, because they are afraid that that will actually dilute support for the war. So no longer is Putin's war causing your economic woes, because then people will say, stop Putin's war, you stop the war. So they're very careful not to attribute the blame for any economic ill on the war and on Putin, just to make sure that the support doesn't get diluted. But, you know, as economic difficulties increase, it is bound to, some impact is bound to be there. Now, the point that you made about China is very relevant. China has taken great advantage of this pause in the US hostility towards it in various ways, in economic ways, technological ways, in extending, as you say, to West Asia, Africa. All of this they already had, but they've kind of strengthened it. And India, this is the critical point that you made was about India. That, you see, now when the US recovers from this war or withdraws from this war, or whichever way you look at it, when this war ends and it turns its attention back to China, it has to deal with a number of issues relating to China. And in those issues, they will have to give in to China in some areas as well, because they are just, the interdependence is too great. And don't forget, Biden has to go in for elections tomorrow, next year. And therefore, they do not want a major economic disruption with China, which will upset their election calculations. So some kind of a modus vivendi, some kind of an accommodation with China cannot be ruled out over the next 1 year. Where does that leave India? Because that will then make China more aggressive towards India. I don't mean that they will attack. Some of our commentators are saying that they will walk into Arunachal and things like that. I'm not sure that that's they will take a much tougher stand vis-a-vis India. And then that is where it will become evident that the US and India's interests vis-a-vis China, while being convergent, are not actually congruent. There are differences. And we have our tactical approach to China has to take that into account and see how we can deal with China in that sense. That's a very valid point that you made there.
So next one would be Saravanan Rajasekhar from Leeds, UK. Saravanan.
Thanks, Pugal. So, good afternoon, good evening, Raghavan. So, thanks for your input so far. We've learned a lot from DPF. I live here in UK, and it is understandable that the Indian security establishment takes a pro-Russia stance. But given that what India is, the world's largest democracy, is it not natural for India to align with other democracies like the US, UK, and Europe and condemn Russia? And is India actually missing an opportunity to fully align itself with NATO in this war? You know, like we've seen what has happened with Australia. Like they've got a really good deal with AUKUS, you know, the nuclear submarine deal with the US and UK. So is India actually missing out on opportunities here? And the second question that I would like to ask is, how significant was Angela Merkel's exit in Putin's calculations about Ukraine? And what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you. To take the first point first, you said the security establishment may be pro-Russia, but the rest of India should take a strategic decision to side with democracy. I don't think it is a security establishment that is pro-Russia. In fact, we're not talking about pro-Russia. We've got to a polarized stage in the world where when somebody talks about having to deal with Russia, he's promptly called pro-Russia and anti-America. That's really not the way in which our establishment in India looks at it, the composite establishment. I'm not talking about the security establishment. The composite strategic establishment in India. As I mentioned before, you look at a map and your decisions have to depend on where you sit in the world and where other countries sit in the world. So that actually determines the way India deals with China, India deals with Russia. Our history with Russia has also been different because of the geography. Our history with Russia is not the same as that of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which have had Russia sitting on its shores and committing atrocities. We've never had that. So all these, you see, the composite of history and geography determine how you take a strategic decision. It is not based on pro or anti. The other point about democracy being on the side of democracy against autocracy, I think if you see the reaction to the war so far around the world, you can see that. I mean, you can see that when Blinken went to the Organization of American States, which is America's backyard down in South America, and wanted to have a resolution passed which condemned Russia, who opposed it? The great democracies of Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. While Blinken was sitting there, he was not able to get a statement. Why was that so? They are democracies, and their democracies sitting, they are actually allies or semi-allies of America. The idea, the point I was trying to make is that these are old and jaded concepts. The concept is countries have to look after their interests in their region, because if they don't look after their interests, nobody else is going to look after their interests for them. And that is why I'm saying that when we talk about democracies and autocracies, really we are harking back, we are extrapolating a Cold War concept and trying to make it work here. And you see, even democracies today, what is democracy? You now have a World Index of Democracy, which puts countries as, which starts ranking countries from fully democratic to partially democratic to partially free to hybrid democracies to autocracy. So where on that spectrum does anybody stand? Some of these countries which you say are democracies are actually classified there as hybrid systems. So I think we should not use labels. I mean, very often we've been told in the past also that if you don't do this, you are not on the right side of history. Let history determine whether you are on the right side or wrong. I think we have to take care of our own interests. The other point is about Angela Merkel that you mentioned. Look, I don't think Putin's calculations had anything to do with Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel led Germany very effectively over nearly 2 decades. But I think during the last part of her tenure, she had kind of lost her grip on the European-American relationship, in my view. This is my personal view, by the way. I don't think that had any impact on. What had impact on Putin's calculations was what he saw as happening in Ukraine, what he saw as his opportunities for settling something in short order. Of course, he was wrong in that calculation. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think Merkel had anything to do with it.
Anyone? Stanley, do you have any comments?
There's one more who wanted to ask a question, Pugal.
No, Ravi is not responding.
Okay. Stanley is still there?
Stanley is there.
Yeah, I'm here. No more comments. I think we can wrap it up if there are no more questions.
Stanley, one question to you. After all these things, the New World Order and all these things, what would be the impact of all these things in BRICS?
No,
you're asking me? You're asking him, no? Yeah. Please answer. Yeah.
I mean, I have nothing more to say. I mean, it's in the light of the discussion we had. I think everybody is hedging their bets. Everybody is trying to protect their interests. Just one thing I would like to add is when I know you asked about whether India is sitting on the fence. India is standing on its ground. India is not sitting on any fence. So I think every country is doing the same thing. So BRICS would also, I think India realizes that Ambassador has clearly pointed out, you have your maritime security concerns, your maritime interest, you also have your continental concerns. So you need to balance in between. So BRICS is important, SCO is important, Quad is important. So you need to basically do multi-engagement with all the major powers, because that's what the present stature of the global order demands from all aspiring powers, I think.
A slightly tangential question from here. See, when Russia and China bonding together more prominently these days. So in that scenario, from Vladivostok to Black Sea, these two countries together would be controlling most of the ports in one half of the world. So how do you think this would become like a monopoly in logistics kind of a thing? Seaport logistics. Would that be a threat or would that be a blessing?
I'm not going into the details of this, but if you are talking generally about the US, about the Russian-Chinese partnership, it is, I think, of course, it is a matter of concern, but what should India do? Should India alienate Russia completely and allow this Russia-Chinese cooperation to flourish? Or should India retain the cards it has, the historical relationship it has built with Russia, and then you retain some kind of balance, because the Russians also care for their relationship with India. So irrespective of the details of what you asked, I think the general proposition, if you ask me, is that India has to maintain its warm ties with Russia, especially considering the fact that the Russians and the Chinese are now moving closer towards each other.
Yeah, okay.
One more question, last question from Dr. Johny. Could you please unmute Professor Johny from Toronto?
Yes, thank you. So the last question, sorry about it. So with the end of this war, would the principle of sanctity of national borders be compromised? Meaning the current world order, inviolability of the borders, the sovereignty, all those principles, will it be affected severely with the end of this war?
Whom are you asking this question to?
Please unmute.
Yeah, but both speakers, please. Yeah.
Just one thing, I think, there is no doubt that Ukraine's territorial integrity has been violated here. But, with this war, I don't think this didn't start with this war, right? When Donald Trump was the president, he recognized Israel's illegal annexation of Golan Heights of Syria. Israel has also illegally annexed Jerusalem, which Trump had decided to move the embassy to Israel. Turkey currently is, controlling parts of Syrian territories on its border, which it had carved out through 3 different military incursions into Syria. So there are many examples here. So whether the Russians violated Ukrainian sovereignty, territorial integrity, etc., yes. But several other countries have also done the same thing. So since Turkey is a NATO member, since Israel is America's most important ally in West Asia, these issues do not become a global, nobody is going to sanction Israel, right? There is no economic war against Israel, not against Turkey, but there would be against Russia because Russia is your rival. I think we can look at it from that perspective. That's it. Thank you.
And anyway, boundaries have been defined only after wars.
No,
Like
I would like to add to that. that, even this principle of sanctity of borders, territorial integrity, sovereignty, these are all constructs that from time to time occur in history and from time to time are overthrown in history. So even if you look at it, yes, you talked about Israel. You also can talk about China, the way China has virtually converted South China into its own sea, but moved the sanctity of borders even within Europe has been sort of violated after the Cold War in the Balkans. Kosovo, look at what happened to Yugoslavia. So sanctity of borders is, again, you swear by it when it is convenient to you and when it supports your point of view. You criticize it when it does not support your point of view. So, and really speaking, even if you look at Russia and Crimea, what the West did in 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea, it did annex Crimea. I mean, whatever it went through, all kinds of processes which were cosmetic, but they annexed Crimea. The world actually accepted it. They didn't do anything about it. So these are all, basically, it's a play of geopolitics. It is as Thucydides again say, the strong do what they can and the weak must endure what they must.
Good.
Pugar? Yeah, we can close it. If there are no more questions, then...
Okay. So it was really an insightful discussions with Ambassador and Stanly Johny. And thank you very much, Pugar, for organizing this. And I would like to thank DPF, Dravidian Professionals Forum, for giving opportunity for such a wonderful platform where meeting of the minds, discussions, debates, even dissents happening. So the essence of democracy, that's where it is. And in that regard, I would like to thank our founder, Dr. PTR Painivel Tyagarajan, the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, who was a key person in finding this DPF, Dravidian Professionals Forum. And thank you very much, Pugar, and the people behind this DPF who are behind the scenes and making this Zoom event happen. Thank you, Bharati, and thank you everyone there. So thank you, Ambassador, for sparing your time, and thank you, Stanley, for joining this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bharati. It was really so nice of you for taking your time and making such a wonderful speech, and it was so delightful to hear you. And many thanks, Stanley, for such a wonderful speech. We'll keep meeting again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this opportunity to interact with you.